So the last section for this week's work is about moral rights. So in many ways, moral rights is a logical extension of Kant's work. So let's get into it. Moral rights take Kant's idea that there are some absolute moral principles that are based upon our nature as rational beings and that they shouldn't be breached, and extend them into areas such as human rights. Okay. Now the thing to remember about rights is that wherever there are rights, then it leads or it gives rise to a duty. So if someone has a right to a certain entitlement, then someone has a duty to provide or protect that entitlement. And when those rights have the support of law, they become legal rights rather than just, say, a human right. And we can see that a lot of human rights are actually legal rights. There's a big overlap there, but there's also some areas where they're not. So we're going to concentrate in on moral rights, not necessarily the same thing as legal rights, but they often are. So the essential features of human rights are that they apply to everyone, everywhere, all the time, right? Universality, they're universal. They're equal, so everyone has the same right. No one has access to that right more than anyone else. No one has the, for instance, right to life more than another person. Very inalienable, which means you can't sell them, right? You can't transfer or give up this right. So for instance, that's one of the reasons that we'd say slavery, the right to free will, right? The right to freedom. You can't give that away. So if you have a contract for slavery, A, it won't be enforced because it's a legal right, but B, it's a human right in itself. And it's also supposed that they're natural rights. Okay, what does that actually mean? It says you don't need the government to recognize them. They're just there. Everyone has them all the time, and that's an important point. You know, if I was looking at this subject, I'd be remembering these 4 key things because I think they helped us to define what a moral right is. Something that everyone has, it's something that everyone has equally, it's something that you can't give away or transfer, and it's something that doesn't rely on any outside party, any institution to give you. Perhaps the most well-known example is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And here's an example, Article 23, that's related to business, right? Everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favourable conditions of work, and to protect against unemployment. Everyone, without any discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work. Everyone has the right to just and favourable remuneration, ensuring that you get paid enough to maintain human dignity. And everyone has the right to form and join trade unions, right? And these things are probably related in the eyes of the drafters. So we can see that we do have human rights related even into the business world. Just as with Kant's approach, right, these rights mean that they constrain the actions we can take. Well, probably more correctly, the duty to ensure these rights of others constrain the actions that we can take. So no matter what the consequences might be, we should respect these rights in others. Just as with other theories, there are some particular problems when we try and apply moral rights. Perhaps one of the most important is that not everyone accepts what the human rights are and or how they should be implemented, what they actually mean. So if you think about the most fundamental of human rights, the right to life, people disagree about, is there such a thing as a just war? You know, are you ever justified in going to war if your enemies have a right to life? Should we have capital punishment? Should abortion be allowed? At what point do we have life? What is the right to that life? These are very difficult questions that a human right, such as the right to life, doesn't actually solve, getting that agreement about what it is. The second thing, which I think is highly related, is people believe that human rights are self-evident. But the question is, are they? The mere fact that people disagree would suggest that they're not. You know, in previous times, people would point to a source of a human or moral right. They might point to religion and a god or a natural law. From a legal perspective, this was called a natural law perspective. But if we don't require any deity or theism or principle, then how do we know what the rights actually are? Because our view around human rights has certainly changed over time. Who's to say that we've got it right now? And as with Kant's approach, the third element is it doesn't resolve situations of conflicting rights. And that becomes one of the core problems that we find in life and in business. Often two people's rights may be in conflict. And in fact, law is one of the ways for legal rights that we resolve that conflict of rights. So there are particular problems when we start to apply the moral rights approach. So in summary, this particular week we've been looking at how we judge ethics by the action. We've looked at two broad approaches: a consequentialist approach that looks at the impact or the outcome or the consequences of the action and judges the ethics of a decision or act based upon those outcomes. We looked at ethical egoism and we looked at utilitarianism. Then we looked at how we undertake the action, a duty-based approach, what we're bound to do, and we looked at a Kant's approach and also, just most recently, the rights kind of approach. I think what you can see is that there are some benefits in all of these approaches, but there's also some problems and downsides. But by applying different models, I think we can get different insights into the dimensions of ethical decision-making before us. Next week, we're going to move on and take a different approach. Rather than judging the act itself, we're going to look at the actor. How do we know if someone is ethical?